Let's pray again here. Lord, I thank you for speaking through me already, and praise you for the people that you've touched. And I ask now that as we move into the next part, that we can take this and look at what is next through the eyes of that last picture of you. And this is a more scattered, and I just pray that you just tie everything together. There's a lot more different smaller points, and well, it's your work, so you just speak what you wish, and pray that you impact people's hearts as you see they need. Amen. I'm going to draw a picture, and I don't think you'll like it as much as the other one, but that your picture anyway. This is going to be a bit rougher, but I'm going to do another illustration here. Jesus talks about, well, in several places. I wrote them down. Yeah, there's the parable of the sower. And when Jesus explains it, we all know that parable, I'm assuming. So that's in Matthew 13, I think. Jesus explains it to his disciples, and he says the sower is me, basically, the Son of Man, he says, right? The seed is the truth, and then the field is the world. And then again in Matthew 13, just a little ways up, there's another parable about the field that someone planted, and then someone comes and throws weed seeds in it, and it grows weeds. And again, he just explains it, and again, the field is the world. And the world is obviously, it's us, it's our hearts. And so drawing then from that illustration that Jesus used, where he compares a field to a person's heart, and I think there's obvious reasons for that too, right? Like, he knew what he was saying. So I'm going to continue then with another illustration, kind of going farther from what I was talking about Mary. And I often come to this spot where I fall back into the same problems, and I'm like, so frustrated. You know, why does this keep happening? What is the matter? And like Mary, you know, in our story there, that the sixth time, right? She's just so discouraged and disgusted with herself for falling back into this again after she's been set free so many times. And it's like, what's going on? And again, as I was wrestling through this in the past few months, God spoke this into my heart too and explained this to me. So on our screen there, we have a white, you know, that's a field. All right. And so you've seen people plow fields, right? And so you generally plow a field, something, again, my drawing is not good. Hopefully it's straighter than that. But you go one, you know, up, and then the next one you go back down. Yeah, I'm not good at drawing. Anyways, the point is, you know, up and down, just back and forth. And we have our furrows and your soil. But in the middle of my heart, in the middle of my field, there's a large crop like that of granite. It's just pure granite. And you can't till through that. And so Jesus is going up and down in my heart, you know. And over here, it looks pretty great, right? And, you know, I'm a Pharisee, like naturally born, just an Adventist, like. And so on the outside of my field, you know, that outside little bit right there, you know, I nicely plowed that bit, planted some wheat right along the outer edge, about 2 feet worth, nice and tall. Looked like pretty, maybe it was corn even, right? Something tall, looked pretty good. But in the middle of the field, there's nothing. It's just all barren. So Jesus comes along and he's plowing it, right? And so over here, it's pretty good. It's like, oh, I like that. You know, look, some good spots. There's some production there. Then you come along and you just hit you fall over. It breaks the plow. You get frustrated. It's like, I don't like this. But, Jesus keeps working at it. Oh, boy. And he goes through it. There you go. And that just keeps happening, back and forth, and you feel like, this is what Jesus told me, how he explained it to me, why I keep failing and keep going back into the same problems. Because it's not that you just approach a problem and it's dealt with. He's plowing the field, and in the middle of the field, there's this piece of granite. So, you get a bit of good, you turn and keep going, and boom, you're back into this problem. Because, conversion is linear, right? It grows. It's not just a one and done thing. And just because you've got some good truth and found some good soil and you've grown some stuff doesn't mean that you're not going to hit more stone. And it can be the same bloody stone that you keep hitting and you're just so frustrated with. And you feel like, and it's in those moments that it's so easy to just get so discouraged and not go back to Jesus and be like, what am I even wasting my time for? And for me too, I really was like, I can't do any of this. So it's your problem, God. I'm just throwing this all on you. And then he just turns me around and runs me into this rock. And I'm like, you just literally screwed me over. And I was so upset, And then he explained this to me. And through different times and with different people, there's different tools available. But when Jesus, if you go to buy something that you know about, right? If you go to buy a car, maybe you don't know about cars and you make a bad buy. But if a mechanic goes and buys a car, he's going to look at the car, he's going to assess it, he's going to see what all it needs, and he's going to make a good purchase. And when Jesus came to buy our hearts, he looked over them, and he saw what was inside of them. He was not tricked by my 1 foot of wheat. He knew it was there. He saw, and he said, yeah, it's worth this price. I'm going to buy it for this price. And he had realistic expectations. He did not expect wheat to be growing right there in the middle of my granite. It's granite. It doesn't grow wheat. And he knew, because apparently he's a farmer. So he has realistic expectations. And sometimes that might mean that the only tools available to him with this project might be a pickaxe. So forever, he just goes right around that rock, right? And that's it. And he's happy with that. He paid that much for the field. And so this part of the field, over here, that is what he's going to sow over there. And he's going to leave that granite alone. And he's okay with that. And that's something hard for people to accept, that Jesus will save me while there's stones in my heart. But he knows what's realistic. If you have a pickaxe, you can chip away and maybe you'll move a 1/100th of that granite. Good. He's okay with that. He purchased it. He counted the cost. He understood. But sometimes he's got other tools. And in my life, it was my ex-wife. And he drilled deeply into that granite and planted black powder in there, blew the hell out of it, using that divorce. And it completely shattered everything. My ego. And I don't say ego as in pride, but ego as in sense of self. Everything you think you know about yourself. I guess it's Greek. It's your identity. Everything that I thought that I had, or that I thought that I was, and all the good that I thought the good parts of me, the bad parts of me, everything. It was just all bogus. And he just blew it all apart. And that was definitely painful. But then there's just little bits of, rock everywhere in your field. And those 2 feet of nice wheat that I had planted all the way around was now full of stone. And he keeps just explaining to me, just be patient, because now, we're still going back and forth. And yes, you're going to hit stones all over the place. And yes, it's the same piece of granite rock. But it doesn't mean that you've gone backwards. It doesn't mean that you're failing. It doesn't mean that you're wasting time. It just means it's a journey. And I'm after all of you. And some people, there's more tools available than others. And if you get, if God's blowing your life up, you shouldn't get too discouraged, And maybe God has a bigger plan for you than you realize, because he's got more than a pickaxe. He's got some black powder. So that's my drawing. I will leave that alone. I'll make you suffer no more. But that was the main thing to take away from that like he's counted the cost. He does not expect something unreasonable. It's not an expectation based on his desire for your life. It's an expectation based on your life. It's who you are, it's where you are, it's what's available to you. And like I said, somebody who has nothing but a pickaxe, he's not going to expect you to remove like 5 metric tons of granite. Like, just go around. Like he does what he does. It's his thing. It's not our problem. And if you're the field in the parable of the field, right? Jesus is throwing the wheat, or the sower. Some of it lands in stony soil. Some of it lands in thorns. Some of it lands in good soil. Some of it lands on the road. If we are a field, what can we do about the stones in us? Nothing. You're a field. And that's what Jesus is pointing out here. Like, you're a field. I'm sowing. Just chill out. Enjoy the ride. You're with me. I don't judge you. Like, you've fallen over. Yeah, obviously. I know what I'm doing. Like, I expect these things. Like, you're down on yourself right now because you failed for the 1600th time. And you're just like, oh, boo-hoo. But when I bought you, I accounted for like 95,000 failures. So you shouldn't get down right now, because it's really going to delay things. Like Mary, like, the times that we hurt him, it's those times that we're away, because he's like, I got a plan. Just come back. Yep, you failed again, but we're one step closer now. Just keep coming back, because those failures back into those sins is always learning opportunities. It's always bringing things out. And another thing that God just keeps putting into my heart, like, it's not enough to learn about things. You have to be in them to learn from them. And so you can try to learn all about your, the damage that occurred to you when you were a kid, or you can try to learn all about, why you're doing this addiction or whatever. But until you're in that situation and your heart actually opens up and that pain is accessible, it doesn't do anything. And it's in those times of failure when you're just real and you're open, because it's like, wow, you're in it. And it's essential, I think, to actually finding healing. And that's the process of removing all those stones, right? Some people are going to be more healed than other people in heaven. We're not promised that God wipes away every tear from our eyes at the second coming. It's after the 1,000 years, right? Like, there's 1,000 years to process your damage, to process what's going on. God does not expect us to be perfect, to be healed. But there is going to be a group that is, and I think that's the 144,000. And that's God's kind of like, it's possible. Like, Jesus can allow everyone in there, because like, hey, I did it with some people in like 100 years. If I got 1,000 years, trust me, I can do it. And okay, another illustration about this. So, have you ever met someone who's moved here from a different country, who doesn't speak English, who moved here at the age of like 70 and lives here for like 20 years, and their total accumulated English knowledge is high by, thank you. Like, I've met lots of people like that in Toronto. Like, they don't speak English. They've been here for 20 years and they have like no comprehension. And then a few years ago in Sandy Lake there, the music teacher moved here, and his daughter was 7, spoke no English. But she goes, integrates with the kids, and in 6 months is perfectly chattering in English to all her friends. Like in 3 weeks, she was communicating with them. I don't know what they were even saying because she didn't speak English, but they found a way. So, when we've lived in a lifetime of brokenness, right, and we're put into this new environment with this new culture, this new language, this new everything, right? When we come in from a brokenness into this relationship with Jesus, he doesn't expect us to learn in a day. He doesn't expect anything that's unrealistic, just like we don't expect someone who's old to learn English immediately. And often they just don't. It's just our abilities are dampened and we can't anymore. And this is something that, if you know what Caring for the Heart is, if you don't, it's a program that really just processes emotional, spiritual damage through prayer, and mostly through prayer. So emotional damage is passed on. It's generational, and the Bible talks about this. The 10 Commandments, right? I'm a jealous God, and I'll only allow the sins of the fathers to pass to the sons for 3 or 4 generations. And that accumulates. It's a generational damage. So my grandfather is born, gets super damaged, passes that damage on to my father by the way that he interacts with him. Then my grandfather's damage plus my father's damage is passed on to me by the way he interacts with me. And now I'm 3 years old, and I have 100 years old of heart, of 100 years of damage. And Jesus is aware of that. Because, you can say, I've been an Adventist for 50 years. What's my excuse? God must expect something of me, but he knows when you were born, you had 100 years of damage. You're an old person in your emotional capabilities. You're deeply damaged. And he's got a real estimate for you. He understands. He's weighed the cost. He knows you, and it's not unrealistic. And if you're feeling that you're in a place that you can't make it, or that God's expectations aren't realistic, or that you can't live up to it, it's probably because they aren't realistic and you can't live up to it. And that's not God's expectations. Those are your own expectations. And chances are you're not connected with Jesus. You're living under a burden of expectation. Here's another one. If you have a kid, he's 2 years old, he poops himself, what do? You clean him up. Do you lecture him? Stop it. Don't do that again. You need to do better. I expect more from you. He's 6 months old. Lecture that 6-month-old. Teach it. Stop doing that. If you do that, you're probably going to have a kid that's going to poop itself forever, because it's going to be traumatized. And that's a human understanding. And Jesus said, broken, sinful humans know how to give good gifts to their kids. Do you think God is less than a human? He understands. He doesn't expect perfection. He doesn't expect performance. He expects poopy diapers. He expects to be cleaning us. And Jesus even said, listen, unless you become like a little child, you're never going to get into heaven. Because you're trying to clean up your own mess. And when you do that, you become like the Pharisees, a whitewashed tomb. Looks pretty good on the outside. Inside, you're rotten because you didn't clean, because you wouldn't let me clean you for 50 years. Rotten, dead man's bones. We would never expect a child to be responsible for its own mess. And Jesus says we need to become like little children in order to get into heaven. So we need to stop trying to be responsible for our own mess in order to get into heaven. We need to stop trying so hard, guys, and just rest. And I would say the part that we need to play the hardest to resist, what we're supposed to be resisting, is the temptation to let our guilt run us into doing a better job. That's been my experience. It's complete 100% opposite of what I ever thought and what I grew up thinking. But so I'm trying to find some way to make that clearer. So the thing we need to resist is not our sinful habits. It's the desire to go and fight our sinful habits. And instead of doing that, just run to Jesus. And if that means that you're in the middle of your sinfulness, that's fine. He does not judge you. There is never a time that is as good to go to Jesus as when you're in the middle of your sin. And I'll tell you, like, from personal experience, the most powerful times in my life where I've actually gotten to know God and where I've realized that he cares about me, almost all of them have been in the middle of sin. And not just like I sinned yesterday, but like I'm currently smoking weed and I'm just going to talk to you for the next 3 hours because I can't deal with my pain and trauma. Like my divorce, like I can't process this. And sometimes God, like, you go to the hospital and you need surgery. Your heart is broken and you need heart surgery. They put drugs on you, They put you down to numb your pain. And we judge so quickly people who are struggling with addictions, that we're better. But I think God sometimes understands these things. Even Solomon talked about, giving wine to people who have a bitter spirit and strong drinks to people who are dying. Because it numbs their pain. And I've had so many conversations with people, like deep conversations about, real stuff, what's going on inside of them, who they are, their brokenness. Well, they're, drinking, right? Because people open because they're numb. They're numbed down on the emotions. And I'm not saying these are healthy things, but what I'm saying is God knows us and he has a realistic understanding and expectation, and he's willing to work with us wherever. And if that means that you can be open over here in this sinful thing, well, guess where Jesus hung out most of the time, right? With sinners. And he got accused of being an alcoholic, a drunk, because he was hanging out with drinkers so much, because people are open and it doesn't matter where. And if you want to have an impact on other people, and you want to see them open and you want to like experience a non-judgmental relationship with people, then stop judging yourself. Stop doing it on yourself. Stop telling yourself these things and expecting this of yourself, right? That you got to be this good to talk to Jesus, to connect. It doesn't. You just got to be open and real and come. Just come. The story of the prodigal son. Another powerful story, Luke 15. We all know it, I'm assuming. The son goes away, blows his dad's money. We can equate that to going away, sinning up a lot, and then realizing like guilt kicks in. Wow, I can't live this way anymore. I need to go back to God. And my normal process to that would be like, yeah, I better like get a little better or like go apologize or something. Like there's some cost to this on my end, whether that means, penance, performance, whatever. But what does the story of the prodigal son show? That dad is there waiting every day, doesn't know when he's coming back, doesn't know. But, actually, really, when you compare that to God, God does know when we're coming back. And yet, he's still there every day waiting. Because he's so excited to see us again that he can't help himself but go back and wait every day. And when we come back, before we have the chance to give the I'm so sorry conversation and like, let me just be your slave, he's like, nope, I'm throwing a party for you. And how many times do we go back to God expecting to be the slave? Expecting that like maybe I can like get some forgiveness here and eke my way back out onto like an okay place or something like in our hearts. We don't feel like kids that come back to a party. And if we did, and we accept that and don't let our guilt drive us away from that, because that's what guilt does. Well, you can't go accept that. You're not worthy of that. But it's not about that. It's not about us. And the guilt just drives us away and steals the blessing from us. So the sin, firstly, hurts us. And then the guilt hurts us again by keeping us away longer. You know, it's crazy. But yet we are free to come back to a party. And again, you know, Matthew 20, the workers and their wages, right? They go out, Jesus, you know, the farmer, he goes to the square at 6 a.m., hires a bunch of people. Then he goes at 9 a.m. and hires a bunch of people, 12, 3, 5. And then he goes to pay them all the same. And some people are upset with that because they want what they've earned, you know. But all that we earn is death. And it doesn't matter on our performance. It doesn't matter on anything. Like, he wants to give us life. He wants to give us love. He's not about judgment. You know, like, there's no condemnation anymore in Christ Jesus, right? And when there's no condemnation, there's only one way for that to happen, because if, like, condemnation is the response, it's the natural effect of being judged a sinner. You've broken the law, you're condemned. So the only way for us as lawbreakers to no longer be condemned is if we're no longer measured. Right? And like Jesus, I think it was Jesus, but you'll know this quote, right? Don't judge, or you'll be judged with whatever measure you judge. So if we're not being condemned, it's not because we're perfect. It's because we're not being measured anymore. We're not being measured on that level. Our performance is no longer a factor. I have another illustration, my last one. This is to help understand this process of how we can be sinners and still be saved. And there is some verses that I want to read here. 1 Corinthians 15:56. It says that the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the moral demands of the law. Because anything short of perfection, and sin has total control. So, because we're not perfect, the law, which is perfect, just puts us completely under the control of sin. And there's another one, but I don't know where I wrote it. I think it was Romans. I believe it's Romans 7. Let me check. There's some really good stuff here. Right, Romans 7. We'll start around verse 13. How then did the law, which was given for my good, turn against me? It didn't. It was sin, which has been part of our human nature since the fall of Adam, that used God's good law to condemn me to death. Yet when this happened, I could see what sin was like, and how deceptive and totally evil it really is. Clearly then, the law has not only a moral function, but also a spiritual one. The problem is with my sinful human nature, which, like a slave, is sold to perpetually serve sin. I was deceived into doing what I hated, and not what I really wanted to do. I wanted to serve God, but ended up serving myself. So if I end up doing what I really don't want to do, then I'm admitting that what the law says about me is right. By nature, I'm a sinner. However, I also realize that my problem isn't totally me, but the sinful nature I was born with. This means that my natural self isn't really good, so it can't be trusted. No matter how hard I try or how much I want to do what is right, I'm never able to do as good or live as unselfishly as I really want to because of my sinful nature. What I do is not always the good I want to do, and I end up doing things I don't want to do. Now, if I do what I really don't want to do, I'm not actually the one doing it. It's my sinful nature pushing me to do it. So, that is the clear word. So, there's this dynamic happening inside of us. There's a war. And this is something that I think is the turning point for having real victory, or to really begin to experience victory. And this is what I would say was the moment of Mary's conversion, like that moment when it all clicked and she just stuck to Jesus. She was the only one who's really mentioned that just never left Jesus' side. She was there when he was crucified. He's naked in a tree in front of her, right there. There was a few others there, but the first one back at his grave, she's the first one Jesus talks to. She was a random prostitute. And that, powerful, doesn't matter who you are or where you are, she connected, and Jesus loved her deeply and gave her his love, and really she got a new identity. So there's this dynamic happening inside of me that there's a war, and we believe that there's only two sides inside of us. Me and God, really. Good and bad, whatever. But there's a third, because when Jesus died, he set us free. We were born under sin, enslaved to sin. So there's sin and Satan, there's the law and truth and God. But now we are in the middle. We're a free, neutral unit. We're free. We're not sin. We're not God. But we don't realize that. We identify with sin. We don't identify with God. We identify with sin, and it's so easy. That's the power that drew Mary back time and time again. You're a whore. You're a drunk. You're no good. Look at all the things you've done. It builds an identity, but we're not bound to that identity anymore. Jesus has set us free so we can leave that. We're in the middle. We don't realize we have this choice that just as much as that identity held us, we can go to a new identity. So here's my little illustration about this. So over here we have this magnet, and this magnet is God. And this hand, that's his law, and it holds him, right? God can't change. His law is binding. But because we left that, and if God left that, the world would fall apart, whatever. Like if gravity ceased to exist, Earth would no longer sustain life because we would fly off into space and freeze to death. So that's God, unchanging, immutable. And here's me, here's you, right? And this hand is sin, and it holds us. It holds us and owns us just as surely as that law owns us. But the thing is that whereas before we were one with God, now God can't turn, and we're held by sin, opposed. So right now I'm holding two magnets against each other, and you can see I can try to force them together, but they want to push apart, and I can hold them there, but the second that I release the pressure, they're driven away. They're just driven away. And if you've ever experienced two magnets with equal poles, you know the feel of it. It's repulsive. And I can, as a sinner bound under sin, I can drive myself with pressure to God. And I have many times, just like Mary tried to, I need to do better. And you do better for a few days. And then when you run out of energy, which you always will, you're repulsed. It's nature. But as that process carried out, and as Mary started to see Jesus treat her a different way again and again and again, that's not your identity anymore. That's not your identity. You're free. Sin doesn't really have that hold over you. And finally, the thrall of sin was released and she stopped looking. And nature, when you let go of a magnet that's opposed, watch this. Let me do this. It just flips. I'm not pushing it. It just flips. Nature attracts. And now this, which is me, I'm no longer bound under the law. God is. I'm not under that. I'm not under sin. But look at that. Staying with God. That's grace. It's attraction. That's love. And there's no force. There's no pushing. And we can be afraid that if we stop trying and stop listening to the guilt and I got to do better, that we'll just become free gracers or whatever, right? But nature will take over. Clip. And it's there. Not under the law, but tight with God. That was the most beautiful illustration I've ever seen to explain grace. It's nature. When we stop resisting and when we stop trying to do better, and by trying to do better, when your poles are opposing each other, until sin is broken, it doesn't matter, right? The second that the pressure is off, it's driven apart. It's nature. And until that sin is broken, and we can turn and let nature take it, we'll never succeed. But when we do, there's no more work. There's no more effort. There's no more trying. There's no more stress. It's just natural. We become a different person. Now, I can't say that I have fully experienced that, but I do feel that beginning to happen. And it's not through pressure. That's the thing. If there's pressure, I'm very sensitive to pressure and to expectations. And the second that they're there, I can just freely discard them because I know that it's not God. He doesn't expect anything of me that will pressure me because he knows me. He's counted my cost. And I'm free. And when there's that flip, it's great. And literally, I can't explain this enough that every time I'm going through something, I've been tracking my emotional state and been tracking how I feel. And the bad times are always associated with this sense of I am sucking right now at doing whatever I'm trying to do. And I don't want to be here and I need to leave, but I have no energy and motivation. And you just get in this pit then when you're wallowing around and you don't go anywhere. But that's literally the poopy diaper. That's the time to just relax and be yeah, I don't have to do anything. And God carries us out. Our part is just to keep coming back. It's not, that's it. Just come back and talk to him and connect to him. He's a real person. It's not complicated. This was really clicked in me one day not that long ago, a year, the beginning of this year. I was really struggling with some things. God had really shown me some good stuff. And he just, one day, I'd been smoking a lot of weed. And one day I was working and I was really tired. And it burns you out, physically. It makes you tired and groggy. And one day I was just working and I had been praying and thinking and whatever, processing for a few years after my wife had left. And I just felt wow, I want energy. I need to finish this project. I'm just not going to smoke the next day. And I just didn't. And then the next day I was wow, I felt good. And I just didn't. And I just haven't thought about it since. It just disappeared. I didn't quit. It just disappeared because there was something better, which was having energy, because my pain had been dealt with by God to the point that I did not find a use in that anymore. There was no need to be numbed out by that because the pain that was demanding the numbing had been healed. And now all that was left was the negativity of it, which was I have no energy at all and I want to function. And nature just took over, which is the bigger benefit in your life. Natural. And then drinking is not the same. Still struggle sometimes with that. But one day, shortly after that, I was wow, I could really go for some beer. It's a nice, cold, nice, hot day. And I was thinking about this. And so I'm going to buy some. And I started feeling really guilty about this. God just set me free from this other thing. And I'm back in this. And he expects this and whatever. And I was just feeling really rebellious. No, I'm not accepting that. I want to drink this. Then you got to deal with that. And then it just I just went and bought it, and I was feeling so guilty though, but I was I can't give in to the guilt. I know that that's going to be more harmful than going and drinking beer. I know it. And as I was processing all of this, God again, like, spoke to me and was like, yeah, like, you're looking at this wrong. Like, I'm not judging you. I don't care about what you're doing because of what you're doing. I care about you and maybe why you're doing things, for sure. But you need more healing, and you can't get that until you trust me more. And I don't expect you to make yourself trust me. You know, like, God is supposedly the husband of the church, right? The church is his bride. And how many of, couples begin by one party forcing the other one to trust them? Like, you can't. We expect that God is less human than us, yet we're made in his image. So if anything, he's more human than us in the emotional sense, not in the sinful sense, of course. But he literally understands. He expects a relationship to grow. He wants to win our trust. We don't have to force ourselves to trust him. We don't have to force ourselves to surrender anything, to give up anything. We just naturally will let go of things as we begin to relate to him and trust him. And that's what he's aiming for. And until we go through this experience, though, and understand that these expectations aren't on us, that can't happen. And as those expectations are dropped, and as we understand that we're actually allowed to sin because we're not under the law, like Paul says, nothing is forbidden to me. Like, everything is, permissible, but not everything's profitable. I don't want to sin and harm my body and waste my life, but that's my reason for it. It's not that it's illegal for me now. Like, there's a higher thing happening here. It's the grace that was, the law is down here, but grace is up there. That's what's holding me there. And as we start to understand that, and for me, until I've been able to accept my addictions and my problems and be like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It's allowed. Like, God's not going to judge me. I can be doing this and come to God and talk to him, and he's going to love me. And as I experienced that, it's like an inverse scale, right? The one goes up and the other goes down. And eventually, I do believe that all of our problems can just fade away without a fight. We're not pushing them out. It's just going to fade away. I think that's all I have on this one. I'm just going to pray. Lord, I pray that the words that I've said are your words. I mean, I'm just here talking. So you put me here. It's your problem. And I just pray then that the hearts of everyone here can hear your words, not just what I said, but what you have to say for them. And that they can find freedom and not judge themselves and just experience your love, experience their brokenness in your presence, because that is hugely healing. Being broken, knowing it, understanding, and knowing that you're fine with it. You just love us. Thank you. Amen.